Ladies and gentlemen, we got the Springfield Echelon on the channel today, which we will not be talking about. We're actually going to be talking about this Holosun SCS 320 and how it is that I mounted it here on this slide. Now, before I start this video, if you guys don't want to take my word for it, I'm going to put up a ton of pictures. I understand that from this distance it's kind of hard to see, so you'll get plenty of pictures as the video goes along. I did not do any before and after pictures, did not do any videos of me putting this optic on here, simply because I did not know that it would be as big of a deal all over Reddit and online and stuff as it is, or maybe I would have, but I was putting this up here for myself. I was not trying to be cute or to hit it off big on YouTube with a controversial video or anything. I simply wanted an optic to put up here. As you know, we got this back when it was first released this year. We did the tabletop, showed the unique mounting system and everything that Springfield did on this gun. Shot it at the range, all of those things. Trey decided he wanted to keep the gun, but we never actually mounted an optic on the gun, or Trey did it. He just carried it around in his truck with him. Well, recently he decided he wanted to sell it. I bought it from him, and I wanted to put an optic up here. I do not want to take this optic off because I have it up here. I took a few shots at the range. I dropped this. Well, first, here at the house, I put the dot right between the U-notch and the front sight, just lined it up perfectly with the front sight. I understand that's not always zero. It's pretty dang close in most cases, if not completely zeroed if you have co-witnessing sights, but that's how I lined it up so I would have a reference point. I dropped it on the ground in the living room several times. My wife was like, "What are you doing, you idiot?" I held it up and it was still right where I left it. Put some witness marks on the screws and everything, which I've since wiped off because it looked ugly. And it held. So, and I've been carrying this around with me in the truck and stuff, so I'd prefer not to take it off. I plan on leaving it here, but if I get a bunch of naysayers, we'll take it off, do it over, whatever, that's fine. But this is made for the SIG P320, and it has the serrations in the side of it, which do not perfectly line up with the serrations in the slide of the Echelon, but it doesn't look bad either. It flows, you know, from a distance looking at it. It looks pretty good. Everyone that's looked at it said they liked it. So I mounted it up here. Now, in my search for trying to find a closed emitter optic, that's what I wanted to put up here. But I didn't want that price tag of some of the Trigicons and some of the higher priced ones out there. I wanted to try to go Holosun if I could, because again, I didn't want to pay more for an optic than I did for the gun, for something I'm just going to have in the truck and so forth. So I started looking around and I seen this one particular video. They actually have many videos up. I'm not naming names. I'm just simply saying it shows up generally first every time you search the best closed emitter optic or optic for the Echelon. And in his video, he showed and proved that many different Holosun optics, obviously because of the unique design system here for the mounting that Springfield did on this gun, he showed or was telling how many different optics would work, but that he personally had put this optic on his gun. That was interesting to me, intriguing to me, and I don't know if it was because of that video that lots of people over on Reddit and different forums across the internet had attempted to do the same thing, but they were having some issues, okay? He said this is what he ran on his and preferred that. I assumed that some people were calling him out because they were having problems mounting it, and so he done this video to prove to the world that what he said was accurate, what he said was true. Now, what he said about it will mount up here and it'll zero and hold it and all that good stuff, I guess technically that is true because as you can see it is up here. Now I want to talk about some of the other things, how I got it up here. Like I said, I put plenty of pictures. I know it's hard to see from this distance. But I watched his video to confirm that this one would work up here because I believe they make some other SCSs rather that's not the 320, but they were not available. This was the only one that was available, and it may be the only one. I haven't done that much research. This is solar ready, of course, solar backup. In fact, it's got a completely enclosed battery, so it's completely waterproof, closed emitter, 50,000 hour battery life. Also, any ambient light or sunlight charges the battery, so basically you ain't never going to have to replace a battery on this thing. All these things I wanted, I liked, I was intrigued by, for a price tag just over 300 bucks. So this is the one I chose to go with. Now, when I was watching his video, he said, yes, the screws out of the Holosun Optic that come with the Holosun Optic, the longer screws, will work, and you don't have to shave them off or anything like that, because the problem that people were having trying to mount it on there was twofold. One had to do with the pin sets that come with the Echelon, and the other one was that the screws were too long. They were bottoming out on the ejection spring. He claimed that weren't the case, so he proceeds to do the video. He gets his pins put in place, and he puts the screws on there. And you can tell all the way up until he really cranks on the screws, the optic is still pretty loose on the gun. Now, I will say, I've got about 85 guns here in this safe, and I would say that 35% of them at least, maybe more, have optics on them. And so I've been putting optics on guns for quite some time. And something I can tell you of a certainty is 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10 times, when the screw bottoms out or grabs hold of the optic on each side, really only on one side, you have to put, in most cases, like I said, almost all cases, 0 torque or anything. Once it bottoms out and you give it just a tiny little touch, that thing is solid on there. Now, will it come off while you're shooting if you don't torque it? Of course it will, but I'm saying it doesn't move around. You could see that he had a pretty good crank on the thing, and the optic was still moving around, and he proceeds to say you really have to get this thing tight, okay? Now, I think that's kind of misleading, because me personally, I think you should have your fat screwdriver that Wheeler makes, or whatever you choose, Fix It, Sticks, whatever. They should be torqued to specs. Shouldn't just be really cranking down on it, And he crunked down on it pretty good and moved it. You could see it was still moving, and then he crunked on it some more, and he held it up to the light, and he said, well, there's light showing through the rear of the optic. So that was another problem people were having. They were having to shave off their screws that came in the Holosun box, and they were also having daylight show between the slide and the optic. Okay, so he said, oh, well, here's a little trick, he says, that I want to show you. So initially he said you take pin set 2, pin set 2, which is the silver ones for the Delta Point Pro, which makes sense because the SCS here is 320 is the Delta Point footprint. He said you take those, put them in place. That's what he did first. When he cranked it down, daylight showed. That was a problem other people were having. So he took the gun comes set up from the factory after you take the plate off with the 2 rear pins here for the RMR. So he took the 2 pins, rear pins, out of the set here for the pin set 3 shield. He took the rear 2 pins out, left the 2 pins in the front from pin set 2, and he put the 2 rear from the pin set 3 and said this will get me flushed up. So he goes through the same process. He flushes it down. Oh, you really got to crank it with the little tool, crank it. So he gets it crunked down, and he says, see, there's your fix, it's all good to go, blah blah blah. I never see him shoot the gun. I never see down through the optic with the co-witnessing sights that is zeroed on the dot or anything like that. I didn't see any of that, just simply him saying, here, you don't see any more daylight, it's perfectly fine. Now, with all of that being said, that was not my experience at all. I went out, I bought it, great man, it's the only one in my area available. I did not want to wait till after Christmas to get my stuff set up here because I want to get it to the range and do a more thorough review with this optic on the gun. So I went and got it, picked it up, brought it home, stuck the pin set, 2 front ones on the front, and took out of the shield pin set 3 the 2 rears and put on the rear as he said to do, right? I cranked down the screws with the tool or whatever, and I could tell that the screw had stopped wanting to turn, especially on the side of the ejector, before the optic was really tight, right? And it concerned me greatly to keep cranking on the thing, right? So I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't want to jack up my spring. I don't want to seize my spring up. So I backed it off, took the optic off, and I looked down through the hole, and you could plainly see that I had touched the spring with the screw. It's a brass colored spring, and you could plainly see that I had touched it. And it was going to be a problem, is what it was going to be, especially if I would have took my wrench and cranked it. Unfortunately, I have a Fox Swamp Optics screw kit that they sell for like 20 bucks. Greatest investment you'll make. Get 2 or 3 of them. And I had some screws in there. Unfortunately, I've used those screws for so many years and they've got disheveled all over different places in the labeled bags that it comes in, that I don't know what size screws that I use, but I was able to find 2 screws that were just a tiny bit shorter, same pitch and all of that, same head on it and everything, but were a tiny bit shorter, just ever so slightly shorter than the ones that came in the Holosun box, and they worked out perfectly. I had no fear. They tightened when, like I said, as soon as it bottomed out or touched the top of the optic or grabbed the optic was solid, and the screw would easily turn to continue torquing it. There was no, none of that stuff. So I felt very, very confident about it. And for good reason. I've shot it since then and it worked out fine. But unfortunately, I don't know what size screws I use. I'm just telling you, it was ever so slightly shorter than the screws that come in the Holosun box. So I'm here to tell you right now that the screws that came in the SCS P320 Holosun optic box are too long to mount the screw or the optic to the Springfield Echelon. And if you want to go ahead and believe otherwise and jack up your spring or seize up your ejector spring and not find out till you need it, then to each their own. But I wasn't doing anything different. I used the same screws that came in the box, and it was going to be a problem. Another problem that I had is I went ahead and did what he did. Like I said, I put the pin set 3 rears on the rear and left the Delta Point Pro front on the front. Well, I got the screws tightened down. I torqued it to 12 pounds. Then I moved it up to 14, then up to 15. And when I would hold it up to the light, although it had really come down nicely, I could see light in the front. I couldn't see light at the rear anymore, but it was kind of centered right at the button on the side here that you push to change the dot. It was right from there towards the front, towards the chamber or the ejection port here, and you can still see light. Now, it wasn't a massive amount of light, but it's more light than I want to see, because I never want to see light when I hold my gun up to the light. I don't want to see any light between the optic and the slide. I do not see any light in this one now. But what I had to do was I had to use, as you can see, I have all 4 silver pins here from the pin set 2, right? And the pin set 3 is empty, okay, completely empty. And that's what I used. I used a pin set 3, front and rear, tightened it down to about 10 or 12 pounds, somewhere along in there. I held it up and I seen ever so slightly, depending on which angle I turned it at, ever so slightly I saw a tiny bit of light right around the center of the optic. So I cranked it to 14 pounds, or maybe it was 13, I can't quite remember. And I looked at it again and it had diminished, but still, if you just get it at the right angle, you can see ever so slight bit of light. So I went ahead and I torqued it to 15 pounds. 15 pounds, unless the manufacturer tells me otherwise, is a max for me. I'm not going over that. I've been there, I've done that. I've sheared off screws in my slide before. Don't want none of that. So 15 pounds was my max. I cranked it to 15 pounds. I was sitting at my kitchen table. My wife was like, I looked over at her and she was giving me this stupid look like, what are you doing? So once I got it to 15 pounds, man, I tilted and I turned and I moved this thing in every possible way I could possibly think to move it, and I had no light between the bottom of my Optic and the slide. It mounted up perfectly. As I mentioned, I put the green dot between so I put my front sight between perfectly side to side, up and down with my U notch in the rear, and I put my green dot dead in front of the center sight here. I dropped it on the living room floor. My wife, again looking at me like I'm stupid, held it up in the same place I left it. That day I was out at the range shooting, test firing another gun. I put about 10 rounds down range to be sure it was on target and zero. Did not get that on camera because I wasn't expecting to do that today. It held zero, no problems. It's still there right now. I've had no problems, no light, no backing out of the screws. Like I said, I had me some witness marks up here and it didn't back off at all. I feel very confident with it, but I am going to take it out to the range, put maybe 100, 150 rounds through it with this Optic on here. It looks really nice on here. I really like it, but I'm telling you right now, the screws that come in the Holosun SCS 320 box are too long. I mean, he claimed that maybe he got an older or newer set or whatever, and maybe that's why his worked and others didn't. I don't know. This, again, this is December the 20th, I believe, of 2023. I picked this up 2 days ago, and so the screws that was in it at that point in time are too long. They're too long, and you're going to jack your gun up. Don't do it. You need screws that are just slightly shorter than the ones that come in the Holosun box. I am so sorry that I don't know what size I used, but I know they worked perfectly. I torqued them to 15 pounds, and I used all 4 pieces of the pin set 3, and it seems to be just fine. When I just barely got these things seated on the Optic would not move at all. And then, of course, I torqued it down. I really like this Optic. It has 2 brightness settings on the singular dot. You can hold it down and you just have the circle. I think it is a 32 MOA circle, and then you can get a circle, 32 MOA circle with a 2 MOA dot in there, which is what my wife said she liked. To me, that's kind of distracting. When I look at it, for whatever reason, the lines on each side of the circle seem tilted to me for some reason. It's like I'm holding the gun like this for it to look right to me. I don't really like that circle. I just like the pure dot, but those options are available. 2 MOA dot. I kept it at the lightest, or the smallest brightest setting, should I say, or the lowest brightness setting. And as I said, it is a closed reticle Optic, and I more or less was not doing a review on the Optic today, more or less just telling you that the screws that came in there were too long, and if you don't want any light whatsoever, none, zero. I mean, I got the 2500 lumen stream light out looking to see if I could see any light. If you want the most flush fit, and you need to use the pin set 3, all 4 pieces of the pin set 3, and you need to get some slightly shorter screws that came in the Holosun box, or file those down a little bit until it meets the specifications. Torque to 15 pounds. There'll be no light between the slide and the Optic, and you should be just fine. Stay tuned. We are going to get out to the range, put 100, 150, maybe 200 rounds, who knows, through this. Make sure it's still holding zero. Maybe we'll put those witness marks back on the screws just to prove that it hasn't moved, the Optic hasn't moved around on the gun. And stay tuned for that. We really appreciate you guys watching. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, you can follow us on Facebook. You can ask the questions, PM us through there, or you can ask the question through the YouTube app there. And we get back with everyone. We respond to everyone. Any questions you have about the process or anything, please ask those questions. We'd be glad to help you out with that. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Hit that thumbs up. Tell your friends and family where they can find the best blue-collar gun reviews on YouTube. Thanks again, and be blessed, and have a Merry Christmas.